Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of CleanTechies, the podcast. On today's episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Jackie Roberts of AppHarvest, one of the companies I've been super excited to finally get on the podcast. Jackie has a really interesting path on how she ended up with AppHarvest, really just pretty impressive individual, and the things she shared with us regarding what AppHarvest is doing and how she ended up there just was super exciting to me. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did shooting it. I also do want to remind everyone that as always, these podcasts are made possible and sponsored by NextWave Partners. So we hope you enjoy today's episode. All right, very good. Thanks for coming on the podcast today, Jackie. Appreciate you being with us. So I guess just initially, would you introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and how you ended up with AppHarvest?
Sure, Silas. I'm Jackie Roberts. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer here at AppHarvest. I started this last August, and I've had a sort of circuitous career in the sense that I never thought I would end up in Kentucky growing tomatoes. I started as a chemical engineer for the EPA, and then from that I went to graduate school, and then I ended up working for Environmental Defense Fund, which is an organization, and I focused a lot on different clean tech issues, particularly in the energy space, and looking at how we were going to solve climate change in particular, what were the clean technologies, and then how do we work with the corporate sector that was driving a lot of innovation. So I was involved in the early days of a project we did with FedEx to help them spec for the truck of the future and what that could look like with hybrid technology, and really create an RFP that was pushing the industry. And we put the RFP out not knowing if we would get any responses, and we got 42 different teams wanting to bid on the hybrid truck of the future, which is now delivery trucks that are out there for FedEx. After in about 17 years at Environmental Defense Fund, I went to the Carlyle Group, which is a private equity firm in DC, and they had just approached me and started talking about the need to really have in-house expertise around environmental and social issues to really understand some of the risks and opportunities and work with the deal teams and the investment professionals. And I just thought I would learn a lot. So I decided to try that. And I did that for 6 years and worked in a number of different sectors, really almost every sector we invested in. And clean tech was certainly part of that. We had some really great success stories where older companies, maybe 100-year-old companies, were really developing new products that were bringing clean tech into their portfolio of products. And those would be the fastest revenue growing products. And so, I think people often think of clean tech companies as pure play companies. But actually, in my time at the Carlyle Group, I saw just as many companies that were old historical companies that had legacy products, but then also had great R&D and great new products that were really bringing clean tech and driving change in very important sectors. So I thought that was very interesting. And then, at points I was kind of ready to do something new, and I met Jonathan Webb through one of the board members at AppHarvest, and was just very inspired by what he was trying to do in terms of creating a new industry here in Appalachia and what that looked like, and the ability to bring climate resiliency and a company that is able to take the best of nature in terms of sunshine and water to free inputs, but use it in a very smart way. And I thought that's where the future is going. So I was intrigued, and here I am as their Chief Sustainability Officer.
Amazing. That's quite a background. I think it's, you probably have earned yourself one of the titles of the very OG in the clean tech space, the ESG space, because I'd be curious to hear a little bit about that. Is in your experience, when did companies really start to adopt this mentality to embrace the ESG space and the clean tech side of things?
Well, if you think about ESG more broadly, the first project I did with a company was in 1990. I worked with McDonald's Corporation to overhaul all of their packaging. And it was maybe clean tech with a small c, but one of the things that we did was figure out corrugated cardboard at that time, boxes, were using about a third of all hardwoods in the US, and they had 0% recycled content and they were not recycled. 1990.
Wow.
So there was a real opportunity there, and International Paper, Georgia Pacific, a lot of the big companies said, we can't make a box with recycled content that will meet your specifications for strength, and particularly wet strength and stacking and other parts of their specification. And then a small company came in and said, we have a new technology in how we do our paper making, and we actually can make that cardboard box to meet your specifications. McDonald's said, great, we'll test it. So bring it in, and they brought it in, and it met all the tests, because you can test for a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. And McDonald's said, I'll buy all that you can make. And then within a year, all the big paper guys that make corrugated boxes were also making boxes with about 35% recycled content. So when you looked at that in terms of the impact it's had as we've gone to e-commerce, it's really tremendous. And that was all done without regulation. So, so that was my first experience really, with the companies seeing that you can bring new technology in to solve problems. I would say, I really think it's been in the past 5 years that we've really seen companies get excited about taking not just the R&D that they have sitting on the shelf, but really having customers that are very clearly articulating what kind of sustainability attributes they want to see coming out of a whole variety of companies making a whole variety of products and packaging, and companies being able to look and say, oh yes, you want no VOC paints for cars? We can do that. We can pull that technology off the shelf. Yes, you want to be able to grow food without wasting a drop of water. Well, that's what AppHarvest is all about. So I think we've really seen, maybe 8 years ago, people getting excited to go into almost every space, not just what we would think of as clean energy and renewables, which is where I think clean tech first started.
Yeah, that's my understanding too, is the term clean tech came from that focus, but obviously it's got the broader kind of terminology behind it now to reach a circular economy. So yeah, I guess, next I'd be curious to hear, could you give us a kind of a rundown of what exactly AppHarvest is doing, kind of in broad terms, and we can dive into the specifics of the technology in a bit, but just broadly speaking, for people who aren't aware of what you guys do and who aren't super familiar with the terminology, if you could just break it down for us.
Sure. So when you think of AppHarvest, we have a farm. Some people might think of it as a greenhouse, which is almost a giant robot driven by humans. So in our farm, it's a glass and steel structure, two great materials because they can be recycled when we don't need them anymore, but they also have an extremely long lifetime. So we will use them for a long, long time. And in the greenhouse, we are really managing photosynthesis for maximum productivity, is how I think about it. The most important thing when you're growing food is water. Where do you get your water? How do you manage your water? And we have, I think, a couple things that are very unique. And one of those is that we use 100% rainwater. We believe there aren't any other facilities that are as large as we are that are using entirely 100% rainwater. That rainwater is captured on our roof, which is 2.76 million square feet. That's about the size of I was over 50 football fields, not including the end zone. We always have debates. Is a football field with or without end zones? And the water is captured on our roof. It's also captured in our 10-acre pond. And when the plants are delivered and we plant the seedlings, that's when we start to run the water through the irrigation system. And the water stays in a closed loop. So the plants are pulling in what they need and what we're giving them. And then we're making up the water from the retention pond. And then the water is recirculating. So you don't have any overwatering and losing water. That process enables us also to have a closed loop system. So we don't have any discharges. And in the agricultural sector, discharge of fertilizers in water, discharge of pesticides that are used in open field agriculture is a real problem. It's called non-point source runoff. It's been an environmental problem for decades. It's not gotten significantly better. It's what has really impacted the Chesapeake Bay, which is where I grew up in Maryland, and has just provided, and it's got too much nutrients going into the Chesapeake Bay. And so if you have too many nutrients going into your water source, you suck up all the oxygen and you strangle the wildlife or the fish or whatever the plankton is trying to grow. So it's really important to try and keep those fertilizers, which are nutrients, but keep those fertilizers, and then obviously keep the toxic pesticides out of out of water systems. And so when you have a closed loop system, it's very much part of the circular economy, but it really is preventing a lot of potential pollution from agriculture. So those are some of the important elements of our water system. We do one other thing, which is we use nanobubbles to create more oxygen in the water, which then helps the plants absorb nutrients.
All right, how does that work? I'm curious. I've never heard of that before.
It's an aeration system that provides very, very small nano-sized bubbles that then create a different level of oxygen concentration in the water, which helps the water deliver nutrients more efficiently and the plants take up the nutrients.
So just a very simple technology, I'm assuming. That's what I'm always fascinated by in the clean tech space, is some of these things are, relatively simple, in order to just maximize what we're doing with the resources we have. So that's always fascinating.
Simple and not simple. Creating bubbles is simple. We all did it as kids, but doing it at the particle size, it's a nanoparticle size, so that it really makes a difference in terms of the transfer of nutrients from water to plants is not so simple. And there's some proprietary technology behind that. So, sometimes the simplest thing when you try and take it down to either a tiny scale, or of course what we're doing with our greenhouse, which is a very massive scale because our greenhouses are 60 acres. Mm-hmm. So you get, a sense of how large that is. That's where things get really complicated.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What about since you have a controlled environment, as I'm assuming, what about the use of, I know I grew up in northern Wisconsin, around a lot of farmers. Both my parents were farmers, so I understand there's a lot of oftentimes, unless you're organic farming, which is not many people, there's a lot of things sprayed on the crops and everything. So are you able to grow organic food because you have the controlled environment? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So we are able to grow our food without using harsh chemical pesticides. It's what, particularly as a mother of 3 kids, attracted me to AppHarvest. One of the benefits of a controlled environment is you really can control what's coming into the greenhouse. So we do a lot to make sure when everybody comes into the greenhouse, they're very careful about bringing pests and disease with them. You have to clean your shoes, you have to wear a coat. We have crop care specialists with uniforms on. And the most important part of making integrated pest management work is what we're doing with some of both the robots, which are using cameras to spot pests early. So if you can find a pest before you get a population outbreak, you can deal with it often by using either good pests or even sticky traps or even manually removing pests. So we use cameras to sense, to track and to look for pests so that we can spot them very early. The other thing that we do is we make sure we have 300 sensors in the greenhouse. Those sensors are very important for machine learning, right? They're constantly taking data on the plants to look at how they're growing, what they like, do they have enough water, what is the nutrient level? But also when that data is coming back, it's enabling us to build plants that are very disease resistant because they're strong. And so, we're able to, even if we spot disease, generally treat it through, we've used some botanical oils that are, part of the organic listing of botanicals that people are using. So I think that it's, you can eat a tomato straight out of a greenhouse because there's nothing on it that you have to wash on. It really is, trying to use nature's best photosynthesis while keeping the bad pests away. And then, of course, we use bees for pollination.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious in general too about, if you could draw some comparisons to, you said you have it's a 60 acre on 60
Yeah.
acres of the farm. Okay. So if you could draw some comparisons to, what you're able to produce versus what it would take conventionally speaking in terms of land and resources, could you draw some comparisons there just so people can understand kind of how, how sustainable this is?
Sure. Let me start with water because we actually have some early data on that. It's not finished, but we have been able to really get some good data on our water consumption. So what we're seeing is at this stage in our season, we're using about 1.8 gallons of water per pound of tomato. And we think that's going to continue to go down because we're in the months where you actually have to use less water as the plants are more mature. They're not, taking up water and growing all the time. The standard, the global standard is 25 gallons per pound of water for tomatoes. So already, we said we had hoped to be at least 90% more efficient. We're 92, 93% more efficient. And I think when we have the season closed out, which is going to be early August, and we get the full data, I think we're going to do even better. So watch us. So that's on the water. The other area, again, the season is still only, we're going to finish it early August, and we started harvesting in January. So you get a sense, like we're really, we don't know our yield numbers yet, but we really think this technology has the potential to generate, up to almost 30 times yield that you would get on a traditional open field farm for that same amount of land. Mm-hmm. So the efficiency of the land and the fact that we're not degrading the soils, as well as the water efficiency, is where you really get the story around resource efficiency. The other thing I'd like to talk about is energy a bit. I don't know whether you were going to go off.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to ask about that next. Is I'm curious, the energy usage.
Yes. So the first thing that is, to me, very important to understand is when you have a 60-acre greenhouse and the roof is entirely glass, you get a lot of passive solar. So what we're seeing in this first year of operations, and again, we don't have our energy data in yet, is that our growers are saying, we're really turning the lights on a lot less than we thought we would have to because we have so much passive solar. So that's really good news. The other thing we did, being our first greenhouse, is we put in 50% LED lighting. And the LED lighting, each LED lighting is about 40% more efficient for that array of lights than the previous generation, which was HPS lights. So the high pressure sulfide lights. And so because we did a 50-50 mix, right? So each array is 40% more efficient. We did a 50-50 mix. So we knew going in, we were going to be about 20% more efficient. Mm-hmm. But the growers are loving the LED lights. And so they're using them a lot more than HPS lights. So I think we're going to be able to do, quite a bit better. And of course, that horizontal design, even though we're also inside the greenhouse growing vertically all the way up to the roof, that combination of vertical up to the roof, but horizontal gives us a real advantage in terms of energy efficiency than just a straight vertical farm.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then the two places we're using energy, we're using electricity to run those lights generally at night in the winter. And we're going to measure that. And we've already signed an advisory agreement with Schneider, which is an energy management company, to start a process where we're going out to contract for renewable energy, because we want to be using renewable energy to use these greenhouses, whether it's on-site or off-site. We want to be the one that's driving that added capacity. And I think that's really important for the sector because you can do it. And it's in our region, solar is the resource that's particularly abundant. So hopefully, the bids we get will, the pricing for solar, I would expect would be pretty good rather than wind or something else. But we'll see. We'll go out to the market with an RFP. And then we do also have boilers which are producing heat and CO2 for the greenhouses. The CO2 is pumped into the greenhouse and taken up by the plants. And once you've stored it in the plants, it's either going out in the tomatoes or we do have some ventilation with the roof we will do to control humidity so that you might lose a little bit there. And then of course the CO2 is being taken up into the vines and the leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we pull out those vines and leaves, we will compost them to make sure that carbon is getting back into the soil in some fashion.
Got it. Okay. So it's really, you guys have really thought of everything. That's good to hear.
Continually improving, right? I think this industry is so compelling in terms of its ability to be resilient to climate change. And I think we have such a strong story around water and not having to use harsh chemical pesticides and our ability not to degrade soils. But, you know, you really have to run just like a Tesla, right? You've got to run it off of renewable energy so that the energy you need to be able to achieve all these great things, including the closed loop irrigation system, which runs off of electricity. You've got to run this on very, zero or low carbon sources of electricity and energy. And so luckily that industry is developing just as fast as we are. So, just like Tesla is going to be able to run off of solar, where there's solar on the grid or where you're doing it in your home or business, it's moving very fast to a place where it's not that hard as a corporate now to invest and buy renewable energy, which is really good news for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One thing I'm curious about too is the produce that you guys have. What exactly are you growing now? What is the process to continue to develop technologies for new produce? Like what does it look like? Because obviously, this is quite a compelling argument for especially large cities if they want to try to feed people in a small space. So I'm just curious, what does that look like now and what does it look like in the future?
We've recently made an acquisition of Root AI, and we talked about this in our, we both put press releases out about it, and we've also talked about it in our earnings call, which was on Monday morning. And that's a team that I just love talking to because I think they have so many ideas about how to continue to drive efficiency, and then also how to help both with a combination of picking the right seeds, picking the right varieties, looking at what the market's asking for, and then bringing in the technology that can really drive the production of those different, the different fruits and vegetables. So right now we're looking at doing, tomato facilities, leafy greens, and then on Monday we also announced that we've got our eye on doing strawberries. So those are our first ones, but this technology can really be plug and play for a lot of different types of fruits and vegetables that can be used for peppers and cucumbers and other things. So I think that the long-term prospect for this industry is really positive, and I think that I think people are going to discover you can use it for all kinds of things, everything from herbs to different types of produce. I did want to just mention a bit more about the use of robots in the system. I mean, right now we're training an intelligent robot, we call it Virgo, to manage the crops, the growing decisions, to bring all those data points in, and that kind of a robot can be configured to harvest all kinds of different crops, whether it's tomatoes or cucumbers. It's more of a universal harvester. So there's a lot in our technology which is copy and paste, is plug and play, and I think that's really positive. And I do think that what we're learning is gonna enable us to have the flexibility to grow a lot of different things over, and I say for this whole industry, given the demand for food, given climate events where you can really create the resiliency. So the February ice storm that happened that affected Texas and a lot of other states, we operated right through that. And we had to do a little bit of juggling. Some employees couldn't get to work, and we pulled in some corporate folks to pick for the day, and we had a Saturday work day to catch up. But we really didn't slow down. We onboarded 100 people that week, and when you saw what was happening to the rest of the country, to me it was like, okay, we just passed our first resiliency test.
Yeah, well, that's quite impressive to do that. That's definitely certainly something to consider. I'm curious to what have been, I like to always look at it from, looking backwards. What have been the challenges to get here? And then what do you see as the biggest challenges going forward with growing the business?
I think Jonathan will talk about some of the challenges were actually more in site selection, which was interesting. I think there was a site in Pikeville that the team landed on early on because it was an abandoned coal mine. And what a great thing to put on top of an abandoned coal mine. And they really, really worked hard and kept trying to figure out how to get the geotechnical engineering to align with the weight of a greenhouse. Because as you can imagine, even after the reclamation work has happened, this soil is just not that stable, right? And finally, it just became clear that the cost of trying to stabilize it was just never going to make this economic. And I think there was a lot of disappointment, a lot of time. I think people thought, yes, this is never going to happen. Maybe it's a great industry for Appalachia because we have a tremendous workforce. We have more rainfall because of climate change than we've ever had. This is the place to do it. But then the team regrouped and retooled and found this amazing site in Morehead. And Morehead State University has been a great partner there. We've had an amazing experience with hiring people. We had so many more applicants for jobs than we could hire people. It's really been a great location for us in Morehead. So that was one of certainly the early challenges. We've had small things happen where, we had a pump break in the irrigation system, which meant we had to discharge to the local municipal wastewater system for a couple of days. That's our backup. We don't discharge just into the yard. We still go into a system where it's treated. But, what we learned is we had to have a backup pump on site because when you have to wait 3 days for equipment to arrive, it kind of and it's sort of an obvious thing. But, so we certainly have had things, that we've learned. And, I think training our crop specialists has been a big part of the learning curve all around. What kind of training do they need? What turns out to be more difficult than we thought? Because there's a very strong component here to the human workforce. I mean, we have a really talented group of growers, assistant growers, crop specialists, and as much as the greenhouse is automated, it still takes a lot of people to run it. And that's how you can do it without pesticides. So you do more automation, you do more tech, and you have more people on board. And then you don't have to use these harsh chemicals, which are bad for the environment and bad for our health and our kids' health. So it's, I think that the job creation story actually aligns with the AI story, and the people who are losing are those who are selling chemical pesticides.
Yeah, understandable. And I think that, again, I've brought this up multiple times on the podcast, is that I grew up in a place of the country where people were always concerned about clean tech and renewable energy taking jobs. But in reality, I think the shift is going to create far more jobs than, the conventional ways. So this is awesome. A couple other big things I'm just curious to understand is, how does your supply chain look for you guys when you're taking what products you use? Are you able to kind of influence those people, those suppliers, to reduce their carbon, embodied carbon footprint? And then what are you doing in terms of delivering these? How does it look like on the end of once you guys have grown these products?
Well, I'll start with the delivery side because that's, where we have a clear vision and we're further along. We have a great partner, Mastronardi, which does actually our distribution and does it from centrally located warehouses. But the location of our Morehead farm and then our other farms that we're building here in Eastern Kentucky, which are within a day's drive of 70% of the US population. So getting our products to market has actually been straightforward and a great story for us. It means we can pick closer to the time the tomatoes are actually ripe. We don't have to pick early and let them ripen as they go. And so we have a better tasting product, we believe. And that's important. So getting it to market has been a good story in terms of really reducing that carbon footprint on the transportation side, particularly when you compare us to bringing tomatoes up from Mexico or bringing them in from California. But I think for us, the supply chain, we're such a new company that's an area that we really have to grow into. Who are the suppliers? How do we work with them on different carbon issues. Obviously, we talk to our utility a lot, and we're a very vocal customer in terms of our interest and the importance for us of our carbon footprint. And we know for our investors, for our customers, for a variety of stakeholders, that that's an issue that we think about every day. The other issue, I mean, there's so many ways in which I think carbon intersects with our business that aren't the most obvious ways. One of those is because we really don't need to use either drawing water from a municipal system or sending water through the municipal system. That saves a lot of energy. Wastewater treatment plants and water systems are very, very energy intensive. The rain comes on our roof, we store it on site. We have a very short pumping system just internally around the plants, and we don't have to go to those wastewater treatment plants and those municipal water systems. So that's a real energy savings. We believe that as we start to collect data, that the food waste numbers from being so close to market and not having to pick early and not having a lot of food loss from the time you pick to the time consumers take it home to eat it is going to give us, really strong numbers. And there's been some academic studies done that suggest, we can hit numbers that are closer to 10% food waste versus maybe 35% as a global average. So we really, or a North American average. And there's a lot of carbon implications to that when you start to reduce your food use. So I think that there's a lot to learn. There's always a lot to improve. But I do think that the ability to work with different suppliers is, obviously something that's important to a lot of stakeholders. And we do hear that and know that that's an area where we can just get smarter.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the areas that I've thought about a lot in terms of, trying to create a circular economy is the entire supply chain, right? There's so many minor things that do have large impacts. And it's up to the companies like AppHarvest who are really driving that to kind of encourage their suppliers. Hey guys, we need to move this forward here. So I think the example you gave in the beginning, right? McDonald's, saying, hey, let's do this. Like, it was a waterfall effect, right? Everybody else did it then too, because one person sought to change it. So just very inspiring stuff here.
We're swapping out suppliers, we're just establishing suppliers. So we're just a little too young to actually have our supply chain set, that then we can start to build those strategic partnerships with our suppliers.
Yeah, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. So I guess kind of maybe to wrap things up, one big question is how are you guys going to scale this? Because obviously this is a problem that we need to solve globally. So I'm just curious, what does that look like from your kind of point of view?
Well, I think the most important thing is demonstrating that it works well with not wasting a drop of water. So if you're in drought areas, this is a great solution. If you have degraded soils, if you have degraded land, so many ways in which this is really a great solution for lots of different regions of the world. And it is a plug and play system. So I think once we have the expertise on how to use a combination of data analytics and robotics and a workforce that is trained a certain way, that it's, I think the sky's the limit in terms of where you can go with this technology. And the other part of it that I love, again, sort of as a mother, is we harvest generally starting late fall into the winter months. So we're not harvesting during the summer months. So this is so complementary to, local farmers bringing their produce in July and August. We're doing our standard refresh of the greenhouse in those 2 months, where, we're finishing up the harvest, but then we're going in and we're cleaning everything out and we're setting up again for the next cycle and the next season. So, I think that countries will see that this is an opportunity to really build healthy diets year round and to bring good tasting, foods that are good for the earth and good for you to people in December and January and February and March. And so, you really get a better diet year round.
And I can imagine that obviously once everything is kind of refined, you could go to places that generally don't have very good growing seasons at all, and you could, produce produce that is good all year round, right? Because you could cycle the growing seasons within each module.
you control all of that. You decide when you plant, what you plant, when you harvest. You have constant. So it wouldn't be hard, I think, to take your system and using all of the sensors that you have, getting real-time data to see what adjustments you need to make for local variability. You could do that very quickly because you get that data in real time. That is the power of bringing AI into this space, is the ability to constantly adjust in real time. So, you have your standard design, you have your robotics, you have your sensors, and then you say, oh, okay, in this locale, it's later in the day than we thought, and we're going to adjust here. But those tweaks become tweaks, not, major redesigns.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. This is just super exciting. Like I said, I was very glad to be able to have you guys on today because this is just something as two farmers' kid, I love to hear what's going on here. So awesome. Well, maybe just a final thing, just kind of some of your personal thoughts on the future. What do you see in terms of the clean tech space? Are there certain major innovations or technologies that you kind of see coming to fill gaps, or things that are already being developed that you're very excited for? I'm just always curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think that it really depends what sector you look at. But one of the areas that I think has been very interesting, and of course, clean energy is just taking off. So we're really seeing the cost curves come down on batteries. We're seeing material science really drive innovations in that space. But there's equally exciting stuff going on in greener chemistry. So you now see, the ability to change the way we paint cars, or we paint the blades of wind turbines. We're seeing, just a lot of exciting stuff also in the transportation sector. So I think that's going to start to change, where hybrid technology is now coming into large vehicles and ambulance, other places where you have an electric drivetrain. Going into that, and not just the Prius, which I drive, but the technology, I think, in all those areas is really exciting to look at. And then of course, food. We're seeing just such interesting things happening with companies like Impossible Foods, and of course what we're trying to do with food. So I think that there's going to be a lot of exciting developments around food.
Yeah, certainly, and I hope some tasty developments. I know Impossible makes a good burger for sure. So, anyways, well, very good. Thank you so much for coming on today, Jackie. I really appreciate it, and we'll definitely have to see how you guys continue to grow and have you on again in the future.
Great. Thanks for the time. Nice to chat.
Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us on today's episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation that we had today with Jackie. If you're anything like me, you're just absolutely fascinated by what has been done and innovated in this space. So again, I hope it was valuable. Would love to hear from you. What were the things that you found really interesting? What were the big takeaways? Feel free to hit me up on Twitter, or just drop comments if you're watching on YouTube. What was your favorite part? If you're commenting on this on LinkedIn, feel free to comment there and share kind of your thoughts, and maybe send this to other people that might find this interesting. So we appreciate your support for this as we've been on this journey. And if you're interested to continue to be involved and to learn more about the clean tech space, please do consider joining the Slack channel that we've created. CleanTechies, the Slack channel. Link is in the description. And yeah, there you can connect with many other like-minded individuals who are both learning and professionals in their own right in certain spaces. So that'd be great if you could join us there. Also, do want to take a break to mention our sponsors. NextWave Partners are who makes this podcast series possible. So we really thank them for making this possible. And if you're listening to this and you're either looking for a career change, looking to go into the clean tech or renewable energy space, or if you're a company that's growing and looking for specific talent, feel free to reach out to NextWave Partners at info@next-wavepartners.com for more information. And as always, again, it's been a pleasure to be on this journey. We will be taking a short break after this episode to kind of regroup and see some feedback that we've taken over the past few episodes, and kind of regroup for another season of the podcast. So we're looking forward to having a little bit newer stuff in the future and kind of changing it up a little bit. So thank you so much for your support up to this point. And as always, thank you, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.